All right. Okay. The date, November 22nd, 1925. The time, 2:30. Now, let's see here. Tickets are 50 cents, $1.10, and $2.20. Get them while they're going hot, right? There's 30,000 good seats available at $1.10 each. Greatest stars of all times. Game starts promptly at 2:30, so don't you dare miss it. Don't you dare be late. And the teams, the Kansas City Cowboys. So the first time the Giants ever faced the Cowboys, 1925, the Kansas City Cowboys and the New York Giants. The place, the Polo Grounds. Now the Giants were, this was like in the midst of, Giants played quite a few games in a row at home. They really played a lot of games in a row at home. Actually, the first two were on the first two for them were on the road. The last game of the season was on the road. They played that in Chicago. In between that, all the other games were pretty much at home, except they weird. This is weird. Let me pop it up here if I can. Please forgive me. Give me just a second here. Okay. So they played, their first game of the season was against the Providence Steamroller in Rhode Island. Then they went to Philadelphia, and they played the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets in Philly. Then their next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wait. 1, 2, 3. There you go. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Their next 9 games, their next 9 NFL games were all at home. Then the final game of the season was played in Chicago. So basically, out of their 12 games, 9 of them were at home. So talking about home field advantage, huh? After this game against the Cowboys, interestingly enough, the next game, this was on Sunday, November 22nd, 1925. The Giants would have a home game the following Sunday, November 29th, 1925, against the Dayton Triangles. So Sunday to Sunday, home game. But in between that, they played an exhibition game against the Stapleton Collegians at Thompson Stadium. And I'm going to be going over that one. But next time, probably tomorrow night, I'll probably have a video up on that one. There's an exhibition game. So just it goes to show you. And as what I can read here is anywhere from 3,500 to 10,000 people showed up for the game. I should have a little bit more in-depth and detail on maybe the attendance. But 30,000 people showed up for this game against the Kansas City Cowboys. The Giants, their attendance was really starting to build. Their game 2 games ago, they played the Rochester Jeffersons at home. They had 10,000 people there. Then their game that they played the Sunday prior to this against the Providence Steamroller, they had up to about 25,000 people there. This week they had 30,000. This particular game, they had 30,000 people there. So their attendance was really doing good. Although their attendance was doing good, they were still losing a lot of money at the overall. Tim Mara, prior to the game, they played back-to-back games against the Chicago Bears at the end of the season here. It was on December 6th and then December 13th. They played back-to-back games. Prior to those 2 games, Tim Mara was believed to be about $40,000 in debt just from this one season alone. And $40,000 back in 1925 is a whole heck of a lot of money. Let me tell you what. We're very, very lucky that he was able to absorb that and that type of a loss, where the Giants may not be around anymore, right? So, but this one particular game is a Kansas City Cowboys. Now, there's some interesting ties here between the Giants and the Kansas City Cowboys. Now, the Cowboys were only around for 3 seasons in the NFL. Let me pop this up here. Here we go. The Kansas City Cowboys. Actually, they were called the Kansas City Blues in 1924. And let's see here. They were never an exceptionally good team, shall we say. As I said, they were only around for 3 seasons. 1924. Let's see here. They were 2-7. They were the Kansas City Blues. 1925 and 1926, they became the Kansas City Cowboys. After 1926, they were sold to the Cleveland Bulldogs, and that was in 1927. And in 1928, they were either sold. I got something on Wikipedia here. They were either sold or they became the Detroit Wolverines. All right. Once again, there's ties there to the Detroit Wolverines. So the Giants and this Kansas City team have some big ties together. So we're going to be going over that as we go along here. But the Kansas City, they were never a very good team. A lot of they were also a road team. I believe in 1925, was it 25? Kansas City. They only had 19 players played for them, which is a small amount. I think the Giants had 29 during the season. All right, let's see here. But the Kansas City Cowboys only had 19 players all season long. And that was basically they had to play offense and defense, but they only had 19 players, which is not a lot. Yes, okay, this season here, 1925, Kansas City played all of their games on the road. 1924 and 1926, they played a few games, all right, at home. But for the most part, this 1925 season, they were a road team. Let's see here. Okay, now the Kansas City Cowboys. Kansas City Cowboys were a National Football League team based in Kansas City, Missouri. The team was founded as the Kansas City Blues in 1924 and as the Kansas City Cowboys in 1925 and 1926. The Blues competed as a traveling team, playing all of their NFL games in other city stadiums in their only year under that name. Leroy Andrews, make sure you remember that name, acted as the team's player and coach. Let's see. I thought that's in 19. They said 1924. I thought 1924 they played a couple games at home. Yeah, they did. I'm not exactly sure. They played 1, 2. They played 5. They were 2-7 in 1924. They played 5 games on the road, but they played 4 games at home. They played 1924. They played home against the Rock Island Independence. Let's see here. Well, let's see here. Here we go. The Rock Island Independence. And it was basically, it was played at Muleback. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Muleback Field. I believe that's how you pronounce it. But that was the home of the Kansas City, the Kansas City Blues, 1924. So they played 4 games at home at Muleback Field in 1924. Then, I said in 1925, they played all their games on the road. 1926, the Kansas City Cowboys, they played, let's see here, they played their final 2 games in existence at home. They played, this is interesting, this is kind of, fun stuff here. So the first Cowboys team ever, basically in the NFL, right, was the Kansas City Cowboys. And then oddly enough, their second to last game they ever played under the Kansas City Cowboy, they played against the Los Angeles Buccaneers. So the Buccaneers, the first ever Buccaneers team in the NFL was in 1925, was against the Los Angeles Buccaneers. So Tampa Bay was not the first and original Buccaneer team. But in 1926 they played them. 1926, the Kansas City, the Cowboys, they're second to last game was against the Los Angeles Buccaneers, 1926. So the final two games in existence of the Kansas City Cowboys was played. They played home. One was against the Los Angeles Buccaneers because I believe the Los Angeles Buccaneers were a total road team. They did not have a home. They were a total road team. And then the final game the Kansas City Cowboys ever played in the NFL under that name was in 1926. They played the Duluth Eskimos. And both of those games were played at Muleback Field. And now, interestingly enough, Muleback Field actually became Municipal Stadium, which was the home of the Kansas City Chiefs up until from 1963 to 1971. After 1971, the Municipal Stadium, it didn't get knocked down right away, but 1971 was the last season that the Kansas City Chiefs played in Muleback Stadium or Municipal Stadium. It changed names. It became the Municipal Stadium. So 1971, the Kansas City Chiefs played the final game ever in 1971 in Municipal Stadium, which was, I said, Muleback Field. I'm sorry, Muleback. It changed names. Let me see here. It was Muleback Field, 1923 to 1937. It was Rupert Stadium from 1937 to 1943. Then it was called the Blues Stadium from 1943 to 1954. Okay, and then from 1955 to 1970. Let's see, last year of existence, looks like it was 1972. So from 1955 to 1972, it was named Municipal Stadium in Kansas City, Missouri. So it changed names a few times over the course, but it was initially called Muleback Field. That's where the Kansas City Cowboys played some of their games. But it changed names along the way, and in 1955, looks like it became Municipal Stadium. And as I said, it became the home of the Kansas City Chiefs in 1963. If I can find it here, because there was a lot of teams played in here, 1963 to 1971, the Chiefs. Because the Chiefs were from the AFL, the original AFL. However, from 1960, 61, and 62, they were the Dallas Texans. After 62, they were having a hard time competing with the Dallas Cowboys because between the Texans and the Cowboys, sometimes there was only so many people that were going to buy tickets to see football games, professional football games back then. So instead of trying to compete with the Dallas Cowboys, what happened was the Dallas Texans of the AFL, they decided to move, and they went to Kansas City in 1963, and it became the Kansas City Chiefs in 1963. So in this Municipal Stadium, the Chiefs played from 63 to 71. Interestingly enough, the final game that Kansas City Chiefs ever played in Municipal Stadium was the longest game ever played in the NFL. It was actually, I remember watching this. It was Christmas Day, 1971. They lost in double overtime to the Miami Dolphins. It was tied 24-24 after regulation, and nobody scored in the fifth period. So finally, in the sixth period, Gary Premium kicked the field goal and sent the Miami Dolphins to the championship game. Against the Baltimore Colts, and they would wind up winning that one. I believe it was 21-0. They won that one. But interestingly enough, the final game the Kansas City Chiefs ever played in this Municipal Stadium was the longest game ever played in the NFL, time-wise. Because after 71, 1972, as I said, the Kansas City Chiefs went to Arrowhead Stadium. Right. So this Municipal Stadium, it's has had a lot of history to it. It's been torn down since. But let's see here. It says Kansas City Municipal Stadium was an American baseball and football stadium in the central United States, located in Kansas City, Missouri. It was located at the corner of Brooklyn Avenue and East 22nd Street. Municipal Stadium hosted both the minor league Kansas City Blues of the American Association and the Kansas City Monarchs of the Negro Leagues from 1923 to 1955. The stadium was almost completely rebuilt prior to the 1955 baseball season when the Kansas City Athletics moved to Kansas City from Philadelphia. The Athletics played from 55 to 67. The Kansas City Royals played there from 69 to 72. The Kansas City Chiefs of the American Football League and National Football League from 1963 to 1971. And the Kansas City Spurs North American Soccer League from 1968 to 69. The stadium hosted Major League Baseball All-Star Game in 1960. It was the first, the first game. In the final football game played here, Municipal Stadium was the site of the longest NFL game in history, a playoff game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins on Christmas Day, 1971. I remember this. I was pulling for the Chiefs. I didn't really know too much about them. I just liked their red jerseys, their red helmets, so I was pulling for them. And I remember the game was so long. It was just, I remember watching the game. You know, it went on. I mean, it was probably into the third quarter or whatever it was or something. Then I went out to the dining room and I sat down. We had dinner. We had, I didn't have coffee, but they brought coffee out after that. They brought some desserts out after that. We ate desserts and all that. I was stuffed. I came back out. The game was still on. I'm like, well, I didn't think the game was ever going to end. But it was a very, very exciting game. It says the Chiefs, after 1971, the Chiefs moved to New Arrowhead Stadium in 1972. And interesting, Jackie Robinson played at the stadium for the Kansas City Monarchs in 1945 until he was signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers. Very interesting. Early stadium history. Here you go. The stadium opened up in 1923 as Muleback Field. I think that's how you pronounce it. Muehlebach Field. It was named for George E. Muleback, who owned the Blues and a number of other Kansas City businesses, including Muleback Beer, okay, and Muleback Hotel. It was built for the minor league Blues for $400,000. It served as a replacement for the Blues' previous home, Association Park, whose railroad company owner decided to build railroad tracks through the outfield in 1922. I mean, you got an outfield there. Let's put some railroad tracks through the outfield. Located in the inner city neighborhood near 18th and Vine, the stadium first housed the minor league white Kansas City Blues baseball team and the Negro League Kansas City Monarchs. The first Negro World Series game was held at that stadium in 1924. The Negro League's Baseball Museum, founded in 1990, is a few blocks from the site. The stadium consisted of a single-deck, mostly covered grandstand extending from the right field foul pole down and around most of the left field line. When the New York Yankees bought the Blues as its top farm team in 1937, the stadium was renamed Ruppert Stadium in honor of the Yankees owner, Jacob Ruppert. Ruppert died 2 years later, and the stadium was then renamed Blue Stadium in 1943. So it was named many, many different stadiums. As I said, I think from 1943 to 55, it was the Blue Stadium. Then it changed to Municipal Stadium. So, but it had a lot of history to it. Has a lot of history to it, but let's see here. Scroll way down here. Demolition. Actually held a Beatles concert there, too. On September 17, 1964, the Beatles played at the stadium as part of their first U.S. tour. Interesting. But demolition and the site today, as with many places, it's not a parking lot, I don't think. Some stadiums are parking lots, but the stadium was demolished in 1976 and replaced by a municipal garden. Today, the former ballpark site is being redeveloped with a new single-family homes. A plaque at 22nd and Brooklyn Street marks the former stadium's location. The neighborhood still contains a legendary Arthur Bryant's Barbecue at 18th and Brooklyn Street, founded in 1908, a fan and player favorite when Municipal Stadium was nearby. No. But so that's where they only played, the football team, the Kansas City Blues and the Kansas City Cowboys only played a handful of games there. But that's where they wound up playing, was Muleback Field, which became Municipal Stadium, where the Kansas City Chiefs called home for just a period of time. But the Kansas City team, they obviously said they were not very good. They only had 19 players this particular season. In 1925, they wound up 2-5-1. Let's see here. Their first game of the season, they beat the Duluth Kellys. Then they lost to the Akron Pros. Then they lost to the Cleveland Bulldogs, and they lost to the Chicago Cardinals. They tied the Rock Island Independents. Then they lost to the Rock Island Independents. They played them back-to-back weeks. Then they lost to the Giants in this particular game here. And then they won their final game against the Cleveland Bulldogs 17-0. So they finished with a record of 2-5-1. Let's see here. They averaged 8.1 points per game, and they gave up 12.1 points per game. Now, interestingly enough, two of the players on their roster, very, very interesting. Their coach, who was the coach for all 3 seasons, was Roy Andrews. And if you also on their roster, if you look, actually Roy Andrews was a player coach for the Kansas City Blues and the Cowboys. So Roy Andrews, apparently, according to this right here, he played guard, tackle, end, and he was like a tailback. And he was the coach, Roy Andrews. But interestingly enough, another player by the name of Steve Owen played left tackle for them. And once again, interestingly enough, Roy Andrews became the coach of the New York Giants in 1929-1930. He coached the whole 1929 season, all of 1930, except for the final 2 games, I believe it was. He was released, and Benny Friedman was the interim coach for the final 2 games of the 1930 season. And then in the 1931 season, Steve Owen started coaching the Giants. And Steve Owen has and will be probably forever, probably for all time, will be the longest tenured coach of the New York Football Giants. He coached for 23 seasons, 1931 to 1953. God bless you. If we find it, hopefully we do. I hope we do. Really hope we do. But to have somebody be a coach nowadays as the head coach of the New York Football Giants for more than 23 seasons, nowadays you're asking for like Moses to come down and part the Red Sea once again. That's probably not going to happen. 23 years of coaching on New York Giants in this stage and all that, and I don't see that happening. Especially because you'd have to be that good for such a long period of time. If you start having a couple bad days or whatever, you have a bad year or 2, they want you out of there. So for you to be able to coach 23 seasons for the New York Giants, I don't see that ever happening again. Let's see here. So, the Kansas City Cowboys were a National Football League team based in Kansas City, Missouri. The team was founded as the Kansas City Blues in 1924 and the Kansas City Cowboys in 25 and 26. The Blues competed as a traveling team, playing all their NFL games in other city stadiums in their only year under that name, which is not true. Leroy Andrews acted as the team player coach, so he was the coach, but he became the coach of the Giants. Now, this is how he became the coach of the Giants. The team was owned by Maurice R. Smith, Joe Breckline. Yeah. You say Breckline, I say Breckline. Cameron K. Reed. The Cowboys were known for dressing in cowboy attire, and fans came out in great numbers to see them play. Immediately, let's see here. Maurice R. Smith. Let's see. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. President Joe Carr of the NFL agreed to the arrangement although there was never any assurance it would be on. The Kansas City Cowboys were actually purchased by the Cleveland Bulldogs in 1927. So that's where the Kansas City Blues were there for 1924. They became the Cowboys for 1925 and 1926, and then they were actually purchased by the Cleveland Bulldogs in 1927. And then they merged with that franchise. So the Cleveland Bulldogs team and the Kansas City Cowboys, they merged. Didn't have a lot of success, but they merged. It is believed that the Bulldogs were then sold to the Detroit Wolverines in 1928, who hired the coach Leroy Andrews to coach the team. The Wolverines were then bought by the New York Giants, who deactivated the team, bringing the story of the Kansas City Cowboys, Cleveland Bulldogs, and Detroit Wolverines to an end. Well, what happened was I was reading, I believe, is the Detroit Wolverines were having financial issues. And so they also had a guy named Benny Friedman, who was the best passer of his time back then. He could throw the football. He was very, very good. Very accurate, very good quarterback. Throwing the ball. And Tim Mara wanted him badly because the Giants in 1928 were horrible. They had their first losing season in 1928. But Tim Mara wanted Benny Friedman, but he wasn't basically wasn't available because he was with the Detroit Wolverines. Well, they were having financial issues, Detroit, as a lot of teams were back then. So what wound up happening was Tim Mara wound up buying the team, right? So they got out of their financial problem. He bought the team, and he disbanded it, and he brought some players, and in 1920, he brought Benny Friedman to the Giants, and also Leroy Andrews became the coach of the New York Giants. Coach Steve Owen played for Kansas City Cowboys and played for the Cleveland Bulldogs. He and Leroy Andrews fell out over their part of the purchase price for the Cowboys when they were sold to the Bulldogs, and resulted in his contract being sold to the New York Giants. Owen was then hired as the head coach of the Giants in 1931 and remained their head coach until 1953. So Benny Friedman was been the coach of the Kansas City team, and I said that he was also the coach of the Detroit Wolverines. And then in 1929, after Tim Mara bought the Detroit Wolverines, Leroy Andrews in 1929 and 1930 was the coach of the Giants, except for the final two games in the 1930 season. Leroy Andrews was dismissed, and Benny Friedman was the interim coach for the final two games of the 1930 season. And then after that, 1931, from 1931 to 53, Steve Owen was the coach of the Giants. So there's some history there together between the New York Giants and the Kansas City Cowboys. They said they were not a very good team. 1924, the Kansas City Blues were 2-7. They finished in 15th place. 1925, when they became the Cowboys, they were 2-5-1. They finished in 13th place. And in 1926, their final season, known as the Kansas City Cowboys in the NFL, they were 8-3 and finished in 4th place. And Leroy Andrews was their coach for all those seasons. Very, very interesting. But the Giants, so this game here with the Giants, I mean, this, as I said, the Giants were on a roll here. They have done very, very well. They lost their first 3 games of the season, and then they just went on a roll. They were really, really doing good, and the attendance was picking up. They were still losing money, but attendance was certainly picking up for them. And unfortunately for them, they 1920. Well, the Kansas City, the Chicago Cardinals won the 1925 championship because they had the best winning percentage, and they were 11-2-1. So the Giants lost their first 3 games. So I mean, back then a lot of teams, whoever had the best winning percentage, many of them didn't lose many games at all. And matter of fact, I believe the first 3 out of the first 4 NFL seasons, the team that won the overall championship they were undefeated. They weren't perfectly undefeated because they had some of these teams had ties. But I mean, like with the Giants wound up losing their first 3 games, and pretty much back then, if you lose 3 games, you pretty much pretty much forget about it. As far as trying to win a championship. But in 1922, the Canton Bulldogs were the champions. They were 10-0-2. They were undefeated. 1923, the Canton Bulldogs were 11-0-1. And I think the Akron Pros, I'd have to, let me see if I can type this in here. 1920. Try that here. They were, let's see here. I think they were undefeated as well. Yeah, Akron Pros. So 3 out of the first 4 seasons, 1920, 22, and 23. 3 out of the first 4 seasons, the team that won the championship had the best winning percentage. They were undefeated. The Akron Pros in 1920, the first season ever in the history of the NFL, the Akron Pros were 8-0-3. So they weren't perfectly, as you want to call it, undefeated because they did have some ties in there. But, so I mean, it says with the Giants, they lost their first 3 games, which almost, you certainly don't want to say totally eliminated them from winning the championship. Because back then, there was 1920 to 1932, there was no championship games. Right? The championship game started in 1933. So back then, from 1920 to 1932, the team with the best winning percentage won the championship. I said with the Giants, because they lost their first 3 games, even if they won all their other games, they still didn't have a good enough record to beat the Chicago Cardinals. So the Chicago Cardinals in 1925 and 1947, the only 2 seasons that the Cardinals won the championship. So the Cardinals have not won a championship since 1947. It's a long time. A long, long time. I got this little, let's see, this is from this book here. I keep reading out of this book here. Got some good stuff in. Let's see here. This is about this game. There's Mara's corpse, Tim Mara, of publicity men finally earned their salaries the following Sunday when Indian Joe Guion tackled Steve Owen, fullback Phil White, and the Kansas City Cowboys arrived in town. Dressing the Cowboys in rented chaps, boots, and 10-gallon hats in his Knickerbocker building office, Mara then sent them on a tour of New York, distributing tickets on Wall Street and posing for pictures on the horses in Central Park. The promotion paid off. So, I mean, he had a lot of times they had distributing tickets. So a lot of times they had 30,000 people there, but it wasn't 30,000 people paid because he had to give tickets away to get people into the ballpark. The promotion paid off. 30,000 fans, the largest Polo Grounds crowd of the season, saw the Giants win their 6th straight, 9-3, on a McBride to Bomar pass and a field goal by Hendrian, who played almost a full game with his crack rib swathed in 2 rolls of tape. So he had a crack rib, and they just taped it up. They just put 2 rolls of tape around his ribs just to try to protect them. That was their protection back then, with a crack rib. Let's see here. Humorist Will Rogers presented the Cowboys with a silver football before the game and offered to lasso any Giant that tries to get it away, but he apparently forgot his rope. Indian Joe Guion, a Carlisle graduate with a degree in viciousness, hit little Heine Benkert with a crunching shoulder tackle early in the game and roughed him up again on the next play. He'd love to hurt a player and just do a war dance around him, said Milstead. Lynn and I decided to teach him a lesson. A few minutes later, Guion carried the ball off tackle, Bomar hit him high, Milstead hit him low, and Guion was through dancing for the afternoon. So it was a rough game, very rough game back then. And I said, I mean, guys playing with cracked ribs and they just put some tape on them. All right, go in, you're good to go. All right, let's see here. What do we got here? Is this it? Oh, all right, there we go. All right. Time machine. Kansas City repulsed by the Giants 9-3. Giants turned back Kansas City 9-3. Haynes touchdown in first quarter, followed charge of 67 yards. Hendrian kicks field goal. The Cowboys threaten often but lack scoring punch. 30,000 view the struggle. Cowboys, Tigers, Bulldogs, and Steamrollers all look alike to the New York Football Giants. That would be the Kansas City Cowboys, the Columbus Tigers, the Cleveland Bulldogs, and the Providence Steamroller. They forgot the Bisons in there too, the Buffalo Bisons, and the Rochester Jeffersons. But anyway, playing before a crowd of 30,000 spectators, the largest that has seen a professional game in the city. So 30,000, but out of the 30,000, maybe 20,000, maybe paid, maybe 15,000. Bob Folwell's Fighting 11 rolled up its sixth consecutive victory at the Polo Grounds yesterday, defeating the Kansas City Cowboys 9-3. The great battle between the Giants and the Providence Steamrollers last week, which the local 11 won by the margin of a single point, which was 13-12, served to whet the appetite of the New York fans all the more. And with the weatherman lending his utmost cooperation, football lovers turned out in a fashion to surprise even the most ardent supporters of the professional game. I love the way they word this stuff. It's oh boy. Haynes forced to retire. Unfortunately, Hinkie Haynes, he broke his nose a couple weeks ago, and he paid a price this season. Let me tell you what, Hinkie Haynes, he scored the first 2 touchdowns in Giants history. The Giants offense slowed up after Hinkie Haynes was hurt early in the second period. He scored a touchdown in the first period, and then he got injured in the second period. The popular Penn State star, who suffered a broken nose several weeks ago, was tackled hard on receiving a punt, and his ankle was twisted, forcing him to retirement from the conflict. New York made the only touchdown of the game in the first period on a march of 67 yards, 24 of which were made through the air on 2 passes from McBride to Bomar. Haynes, Hendrian, and McBride tore through the center of the line behind the fine interference of Alexander, the Doc Alexander, who was their center, who would become the Giants head coach in 1926. So McBride tore through the center of the line behind the interference of Alexander, Carney, and Tomlin, and Haynes carried the ball over the Kansas City after Kansas City had held twice on its own 1-yard line. I love this name. Blood Good kicked a field goal from 30 yards out for the Cowboys only 3 points in the second period. And Hendrian dropped the ball over from the 25-yard line in the third period for the Giants' 3 other points. So Giants scored 6 points in the first period. They missed the extra point. I'm not sure if it was blocked or what happened. Then the Kansas City Cowboys kicked the field goal in the second quarter, and then in the third quarter, the Giants kicked the other field goal for the final score of 9-3. Both teams resorted to passing frequently. The Giants, however, were much more adept overhead, completing 6 out of 10. Bomar, who played a beautiful game in every respect, was on the receiving end almost every time, getting the ball over the center of the line. The Cowboys attempted 17 passes, of which 6 were successful. Each side had 2 passes intercepted. Kansas City fights gamely. Kansas City threatened late in the first quarter when Parnell's kick was short. Taking the ball at midfield, the visitors completed a 21-yard pass from White to Bloodgood. But their attempts to gain through the line and the air were broken up, and New York took over the ball. Let's see here. The Cowboys had another chance to score in the second period when H. Hill threw a 30-yard pass to Bloodgood to New York's 20-yard line. A penalty on Kansas City interrupted its drive, and after Hill had made 7 yards around and Bloodgood dropped a pass when he had a clear field for a touchdown. Wow. He partially made up for his error by kicking his field goal. So apparently he dropped the pass. Bloodgood. I love that name. He dropped the pass for the Cowboys. Quite possibly, if he caught it, he could have ran in for a touchdown. But since he dropped it, he made up for it, but he kicked the field goal. So even if they did score a touchdown in that one particular instance and they kicked, say, the extra point, they still might have lost 9-7. But it is what it is. Let's see here. In the third period, the Giants began to penetrate their opponent's defense and rushed the ball to the 3-yard line, with Jack McBride carrying the ball time after time. A pass from center went astray, and the chance to score a touchdown vanished as 15 yards were lost on the play. Hendrian then kicked his field goal. So the Cowboys had their last chance to score at the start of the last period when Parnell's kick went straight up in the air. So I guess Parnell, for the Giants, tried to punt the ball, I guess. So I guess he tried to punt the ball. The ball went straight up in the air and over the line, and Kansas City got the ball on the Giants' 23-yard line. So I guess the Giants were deep in their own territory. I guess he punted the ball pretty much straight up in the air, and the Cowboys got the ball at the 23-yard line of the Giants. Down 9-3. All they needed was a touchdown and an extra point, and they wind up winning the game. But it was not meant to be. But here the New York line showed its mettle by again stopping the attack dead and taking the ball on their 20-yard line when McBride knocked down a pass on 4th down. So I get it. It's a lot of times it's just weird back then. I mean, I don't know whether they didn't try to go for a field goal or so. A long run by McBride gave the Giants the ball on their opponent's 12-yard line later in the fourth quarter, but the ball was called back and the Giants were penalized 15 yards for roughness. On the 4th down, Parnell threw the ball 50 yards down the field and over the goal line instead of kicking it, and the game ended soon after as Benkert intercepted a pass near midfield. So, let's see. So we got Jappy for the Giants players. Jappy was the left end. Milstead was the left tackle. Carney was the Giants left guard. Alexander, who became the Giants coach, Doc Alexander in the 1926 season, was the Giants center. Tomlin was their right guard. Parnell was their right tackle. Bomar was their right end. Hendrian was their quarterback. Hinkie Haynes, who got knocked out, was their left halfback. Benkert was their right halfback, and McBride was their fullback. For Kansas City, Weber was their left end. Owens was their left tackle. Roy Andrew, right, who was their player coach, was their left guard. Roy Andrews, who was their player coach, who also became, once again, the coach of the Giants in 1929 and 1930. Okay, he was the Cowboys' left guard. Minton was the center. Howard was the right guard. Thompson was their right tackle. Munn was the right end. Bloodgood was their quarterback. White was the left halfback. Guion was their right halfback. And C. Hill was their fullback. All right, substitutions. The Giants had, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like five substitutes. That's pretty much normal, like 4 to 5 for a game. That seems so far what I'm gathering. That's pretty much average. Kansas City had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like they had 7. So that was quite a few. Seven's quite a bit. But let's see, time of periods was 15 minutes. So that was that. And then we have, got one more here for you as we read this up here. All right, it says here, 30,000 seed New York Grid Giants win 9-3. KC Cowboys victims in 6 straight wins. So the Giants, this is their 6th straight win. There's also an article here that says Grange to play here on December 6th. He signs with the Pros. So Red Grange was huge. He was like Michael Jordan of college. He was of college football. He was unbelievable. He finished his season at Illinois, and he signed with the Chicago Bears, and he made a lot of money per each game. But he was going to be playing back-to-back games against the Giants. The last 2 games of the season for the Giants were against the Bears. All right, so let's see here. It says Haynes scores touchdown, Hendrian kicks goal. Professional football taking deeper root week by week in this neighborhood was observed yesterday by nearly 30,000 folks at the Polo Grounds, where the New York Giants defeated the Kansas City Cowboys 9-3. That vast member of soul-seeking Sabbath recreation saw the Giants win their 6th consecutive game, and a feat which would cause no end of envy to spring in the bosoms of many a university. In their victory, the Giants displayed a wide variety of football, modern and new. Both the Giants and Cowboys exhibited several trick formations and frequently showed proficiency in the art of interfering. All right. Haynes scores first. In the first period, Lynn Bomar, late of Vanderbilt, caught 2 long passes from Jack McBride, who was quite some pumpkins at Syracuse in his day. The Giants started from their own 40-yard line and were driving some very efficient gaining until they reached the Stockman's 5-yard line. Okay. Then the herdsman held them firmly for 3 downs, but on the 4th down, Hinkie Haynes, Penn State here, major and minor league baseball athlete, and the best saxophone player in Red Lion, Pennsylvania, carried the ball over for a touchdown. McBride failed to kick for the extra point. So he failed to kick, so I guess he just missed it. He tried to kick the extra point, I guess a drop kick, and he failed. So the Giants on 4th down. The Helmsmen are for 3 downs, but on 4th down. So the Giants got down whatever to the 1-yard line. And they did, instead of trying to kick a field goal, they went for a touchdown. And Hinkie Haynes on 4th down crashed in. So if he got stopped there, the Giants might have lost this game. Right? Let's see. Lose a chance for a tie. The Ranchers would have tied the score at least in the second period if the ball had handles on it. Bloodgood caught. Bloodgood. H. Hill's pass for a 30-yard gain, bringing the ball to the Giants' 20-yard line. Again, Hill passed to Bloodgood, but the latter, standing on the 5-yard line and with none of the Cowboys within shouting distance, dropped the ball and couldn't recover it in time to make a touchdown. So he was standing on the 5-yard line, apparently all by himself. They don't. Was the ball high? Did it hit him here? Was it who knows? But he was apparently all by himself on the 5-yard line, and actually might have put him ahead because the Giants missed the extra point. They were only up 6-0. So if he caught the ball, he goes in there, scores a touchdown. They kick the extra point. Kansas City is now up 7-6. Let's see here. But Bloodgood atoned for this by dropping back on the next play to the 34-yard line and drop kicking for the Cowboys, only 3 points. The Giants added 3 more points in the third period. Whoops. The method of procedure being something like this. Art Carney, the former Navy player, intercepted a forward pass on the Giants' 40-yard line. On the next play, the KCs quite forget themselves and engaged in some energetic slugging, which cost them 15 yards. So I guess they got a 15-yard penalty on them. Heine Benkert galloped 15 yards, McBride 5, Rooney 6. After an inferior pass, Rooney was thrown for a loss of 12 yards. On the last down, Hendrian drop kicked about 25 yards for 3 more points. So that's where the Giants wound up scoring. So it says that there was no scoring in the final period, so the Giants wound up winning by a score of 9-3. So, but I mean, back then that's the way it was. I mean, everything was, every scoring chance was actually absolutely huge. It's not the way it is nowadays. I mean, it's as we see, whatever it was a couple of years ago, the Bills and the Chiefs, right, went down. The Bills went up by 3 points in the playoff game. Remember that? But they left 13 seconds on the clock. It's all Patrick Mahomes needed to get into field goal range. 2 pass plays and then a field goal. They tie it up, send it overtime, and the Chiefs wound up winning overtime. I mean, it wasn't like that back then. Back then, everything was huge, absolutely. So, nowadays the team can score. We've seen the Giants score 31 points in the second half against the Cardinals, right? I mean, they're just marching up and down the field. It wasn't like that back then. Everything, was so important. Every field goal opportunity, every time they missed a pass, every time they missed an extra point, and it was absolutely huge. So when they're talking in the papers, like so-and-so, they were driving in the third quarter. That was huge. Nowadays, it's like, yeah. Nowadays, it's like the teams don't march up and down the field. You turn it off because the game's so boring. It's only 28-27. It's boring. You know what I mean? Well, back then, it was, you score a touchdown. That was huge back then because you never know. Sometimes the one touchdown could be the margin of victory, So the Giants wind up winning. They won their 6th consecutive game, as I said right here. All right, the New York Football Giants. Okay, so they beat the Cleveland Bulldogs 19-0. Then they beat the Buffalo Bison 7-0. Then they beat the Columbus Tigers 19-0. Then they beat the Rochester Jeffersons 13-0. Then they beat the Providence Steamroller. That was the game before this one, 13-12. Then they beat the Kansas City Cowboys 9-3. So the Giants lost their first 3 games. They lost the Providence Steamroller, and then they lost the next back-to-back games, Saturday, Sunday against the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. Back-to-back, October 17th and 18th. Guys were playing back-to-back 60-minute games back then. So the Giants lost their first 3. Then they won their next 6, and now they're 6-3. And then, of course, their next game would wind up going up against the Dayton Triangles, okay, which would be the following Sunday, right? So this game was on the 22nd, Sunday, November 22nd, 1925. Their next regular season game was the following Sunday, November 29th, 1925, against the Dayton Triangles. But in between that, they had an exhibition game, which I'm going to do tomorrow night. I'm going to do a video on it tomorrow night against the Stapleton Collegians. The Giants would wind up winning 7-0. They played in Thompson Stadium in front of it says here. I have to look more in depth in detail, but it says anywhere from a crowd from 3,500 to 10,000. But the thing was that just it was, they needed attendance. That's why they would play these exhibition games, to go out and try to draw up a crowd to make some money. I keep saying, pretty much almost all these videos I keep doing. It's not like obviously the way it is nowadays, where they got the TV revenue and all this stuff and everything. Every team is like, given, so much money, from the TV and all. So every team is guaranteed each year so much money. Well, it wasn't like that back. Nobody was guaranteed any money. If you had nobody come in the stands, you're not making any money. You're really, really, really screwed. So that's why the Giants, their next game was an exhibition game against the Stapleton Collegians, basically just to draw up some money. I mean, could you imagine that nowadays? The Giants just played them, against the Dallas Cowboys, and then they got a tough game the following week against the Philadelphia Eagles. But in the meantime, man, we're going to go play an exhibition game. We're going to put our starters in there. They're going to play all 60 minutes. Hopefully they don't get hurt, right? And then we'll be ready to play a few days later against the Philadelphia Eagles. Could you imagine that nowadays? But that's the way it was back then. That's the way it was back then. Just, they had to do whatever they could to make some money. So it was very, very important. So that pretty much wraps up this video here. So that's what happened on this date, November 22nd, 1925, in New York Football Giants history. We'll see you next time.